Um, Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Magdalena Garcia. I work with the Protected and Conserved Areas team at the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity. I will be moderating this webinar today, which we organized together with our colleagues from the IUCN World Conservation and Protected World Commission on Protected Areas. This is the second webinar on our series supporting the Target 3 community of practice, a space designed to support the many organizations involved in implementing Target 3 of the Global Biodiversity Framework. It's a space designed to support the many organizations involved in implementing Target 3, a space meant to foster dialogue, encourage the exchange of experiences, ideas, tools, knowledge, information, and overall lessons learned. Above all, it should be a space where each of us can learn something new that is valuable for our work. I hope you will find today's information and experience useful, and that you will continue joining in the activities we organize for the community of practice. Our first webinar focused on other effective conservation measures, or OECMs. Today we turn our attention to conservation finance, a key topic identified by members during an earlier phase of this community of practice. So this session will explore sustainable finance mechanisms that support protected and conserved areas, highlighting the recent IUCN-WCPA guidance that David is gonna present, as well as best practices, examples, and tools that can be adapted and maybe scaled across different contexts. We have together amazing colleagues from a range of organizations that are together with us. We will begin with David Meyers. I'm gonna share. No, I'm not gonna share. We will begin with David Meyers, who will introduce the recently launched IUCN-WCPA guidance on conservation finance. Then Zdenka Piskulic from Enduring Earth will speak about financial models for long-term conservation. Candy Stevens from Sustainable Finance Coalition will share lessons from sustainable finance effort in South Africa. We will then hear from Alonso Martinez from BioFin, who will provide an overview of integrated economic and financial approaches into public policy for biodiversity conservation. Stephanie will introduce the Landscape Legacy Fund, and finally, Renee will share the over 30 years of experience from the Mexican Fund for Conservation of Nature. To close the session, we will have Andrew Rhodes, the Deputy Chair of the IUCN World Commission on Protected Areas, who will offer some final reflections and closing remarks. Today, we won't be giving time during the presentation for questions, but we will have plenty of time during the Q&A. I want to introduce our first colleague, Mr. David Meyers, who is the Executive Director of the Conservation Finance Alliance, co-chair of the IUCN-WCPA Sustainable Finance Specialist Group, and lead author of the Practice Guidance for Protected and Conserved Area Finance. David was Senior Technical Advisor for BioFin, where he led the methodology and biodiversity finance plan development. He has spent over a decade in Madagascar and has worked in more than 50 countries. He holds a PhD from Duke University and MBA from Yale. So over to you, David.
Thank you, Magdalena. Really appreciate it. And thank you all for being here. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart because, we all know how important protected areas are in terms of achieving so many benefits to nature. And let me just make sure this is working here. Okay, so you'll let me know if for some reason the screen is not showing the presentation. But so I'm really thrilled and honored to talk about this newly released practice guidance for protected and conserved area finance, which was released by the World Commission on Protected Areas, its Sustainable Finance Specialist Group, of which myself and Candice are co-chairs, and the Conservation Finance Alliance. So I'm going to go through this presentation pretty quickly, and then I'll share a link to the guide if you don't have it, um, so you can get all this information, taking your time to read through it. Um, a great group of authors contributed to this, including Candace. So thank you to all the authors. Thank you to the fact sheet authors, the reviewers, editors, and a whole range of groups and people that made this possible. There's 8 main chapters here, and there's also some fact sheets that come at the end that you can see here, cover some examples of conservation finance solutions and mechanisms. We're not covering all of them, but there's quite a rich array of ideas and information in the document itself. Things to think about as you design, develop, and implement any kind of finance solution. One is diverse values, to acknowledge and respect the diverse values of nature. When we talk about finance, we think of monetary values, but there are so many values to integrate. A rights-based approach, good governance is essential for pretty much any finance mechanisms, as is strong institutions. A lot of finance mechanisms will not work without the capacitized strong institutions. We suggest taking a systems approach that tries to, because biodiversity is integrated into so many different economic sectors and aspects of life, you really do need to take a comprehensive approach. Collaboration and communication are essential ways to balance trade-offs. Take a portfolio approach. I'll explain a bit more about that later. And think about efficiency and effectiveness when you design and implement finance solutions. So those are the principles to keep thinking about throughout. Chapter 1 presents the case for protected and conserved areas, and it reflects on the existing financial flows for nature. This data coming from a UNEP document from 2023 that shows that most finance for nature does come from the public sector. All that's in blue there is the sort of public money, and then the green and yellow are more private sources of funding. So emphasizing the importance of government to finance nature, but also to create the conditions for nature. The split between government and other sources varies enormously from country to country. Here you have a few examples from the report, Mauritius Parks and Conservation Service, showing large dependence on government funding, whereas Kenya Wildlife Service, given the safari tourism, quite a significant amount of self-generated funding. So, and then you can find pretty much everything in between. So it really depends on the country. Overall, investments in protected and conserved areas, 430 by 30, are a good investment. They're a great investment. The total cost is a fraction of global GDP to conserve 30% of the planet. So, but the quantified, the benefits should exceed the cost by probably 5 to 1. That's 5 times economic return on investment, creating 500,000 jobs, and supporting and safeguarding millions of jobs in tourism, fisheries, and other industries, and of course the carbon reduction emissions. So, chapter 2 goes into more of theory, and here we rely on the definition of conservation finance that's holistic, that includes mechanisms, strategies that generate, manage, and deploy financial resources and align incentives to achieve sustainable conservation outcomes. And it's the mixing of all those 4 elements, not just generating money, that sort of drives our thoughts. We talk a little bit about all the different kinds of finance mechanisms. There are 7 classes here. They do overlap, but public financial management, grants and other transfers, economic instruments, financial efficiency, return-based investments, business markets, and risk management. And there's a more detailed table that breaks this down into other smaller categories, and then examples are found throughout the document. The 4 practice guidelines are sort of the main structure for the book, in a way. The increasing resource efficiencies, optimizing resource efficiencies. This is about how to achieve the greatest outcomes with the resources available. Um, and that's through a whole range of solutions like partnerships uh, and efficiency gains within protected areas, choosing the right activities, things like that. The second one, B, is to discourage harmful actions. These are often drivers of cost of conservation. So if you can try to, over the long term, disincentivize the actions from the private sector, individuals, and government that harm nature, like revising subsidies, things like that, but also just improving regulation, enforcement, things like that, essential for long-term conservation, incentivizing positive actions, aligning incentives for positive conservation action outcomes through working better with partners and creating conditions for a successful, let's say, sustainable enterprise, things like that. And then finally, increasing the financial capital for conservation, where you're going to mobilize additional resources and address your financial needs, because we know almost all protected and conserved areas are underfunded. So not de-emphasizing that, just making sure that we come to that after looking at all the other options too. A couple of more guidance notes here to build from what you know. Start with existing instruments and sources, see if you can improve their effectiveness. Then maybe move to a new finance source, a new finance instrument, and only after you've done that, look for something totally new and grow there. Another sort of interesting guidance structure here is looking at your conservation impact of the finance solution versus its complexity or cost. So high cost and complexity, and high impact, maybe some long-term priorities, but you want to try to go for those lower complexity or lower cost solutions that achieve high impact. These would be your high priorities, or maybe a few quick wins in the interim that are low cost but have at least some impact. I mentioned a portfolio approach before. This is really essential. One solution is not going to satisfy a protected and conserved area. You need a range of finance solutions and finance mechanisms to achieve your outcomes. So think about, how much do you need? Is it adequate? How do you diversify solutions to manage risk? What is the timing and sequencing? And how do you integrate what you're doing in the protected and conserved area with your larger sustainable development and rights-based goals? Chapter 3 goes into finance strategy and planning, and it's has a reference. There's references and links throughout the entire document. This is just a kind of overview of a process for a finance plan, business plan, that goes that starts with trying to build the right stakeholder group to get involved, assure there's funding, look at the situation, understand your finance and conservation objectives, and then build that portfolio of finance solutions, put it into a presentation that's addressed and appropriate for the right actors, and then monitor and do adaptive feedback to make sure that you're heading in the right direction. Again, lots more information in each chapter. I'm going to move quickly through a few more of these chapters here per time. So I'm talking public finance. I mentioned before, public funding, because governments can tax. They are, and because nature is generally a shared public good, governments are uniquely situated to put in place taxes, capture fees, fines, set the rules for use and impacts on nature. And they can provide long-term financial support. Many do through annual budgeting process, through financing quotas and rules, for example, and then just in general setting what is acceptable for natural capital use and regulations. And then there are the international commitments like the CBD. Governments take the lead on that and have a certain responsibility to achieve those goals. So 30 by 30 being one of them, right? Chapter 5 looks at international cooperation, donors, and philanthropies. I think people are quite familiar with this, so I'm going to direct you to the chapter itself. Chapter 6 is site-based finance, and here we look at different sources of revenues, and this is really important because a lot of the benefits and revenue generated by the local actors really benefit the conservation side. They can improve community relationships, decreasing pressure on the resources, and then building, of course, a committed base of partners who can support you in your achievement of your goals. This is an example. A lot of these chapters with different cover, these different guidelines. This is an example of guideline D, which is increased financial capital. So you can see a list of different mechanisms that have been identified within that guideline, like user fees, licenses and permits, et cetera, that can help direct you towards mechanisms that are appropriate for you. There is a chapter on finance for indigenous peoples, conservation areas, and as we know, this is a great emerging and historic area for conservation. It's great that it's getting some recognition now. We put in place a lot of resources, share a lot of resources for indigenous people's financing solutions, and some additional guidance there. So again, I highly recommend having a look at that chapter. And then finally, chapter 8 is about private finance for nature, an area that could see substantial growth, a lot of interest in this area. And again, I'm not going to get into it in great detail, but we have to think about the impacts and dependencies that business have on nature. It's been shown that business has about half of the whole global gross domestic product is dependent upon nature in one form or another, according to the World Economic Forum. Of course, a lot of businesses have huge impacts on nature. And how do we help them see and reduce those impacts, understand and support their dependencies in ways that benefit our longer-term conservation outcomes? Some great points and ideas in that chapter. Highly recommend that. And each chapter comes with a sort of summary table at the end where each of the 4 guidelines are listed, and there are some examples taken from the chapter mainly that summarize some of the solutions that you can use to achieve your conservation goals. With that, I'm going to pass it back to you, Magdalena, and thank you so much all for listening. And I will put a link in if someone hasn't already for the document itself. You're still on mute, Magdalena.
No. Yeah, thank you so much, David. Amazing work that you guys did putting all of this information and explanation all together for governments, for indigenous people, for organizations. Like really, really great job, like for different group of people that can access this information. Before we begin with our next speaker. We continue with our next speaker, Zdenka. I would like to take the moment to thank the Japan Biodiversity Fund that is supporting us with this series of webinars of the community of practice, and which has been like really important for us to continue the work that we are doing to support all the organizations that are together with us today. So, well, thank you, David. And we will continue with Zdenka Piskulic, is the Managing Director of Enduring Earth. Hello, Zdenka. A collaboration between the Nature Conservancy, WWF, Pew Charitable Trust, and private philanthropists. Zdenka previously led the Forever Costa Rica PFP for 11 years and served as the president of REDLAC, the network of environmental funds for Latin American and the Caribbean. She also directed the Pacifico Foundation, working across the Eastern Tropical Pacific. Zdenka currently chairs the Conservation Trust Fund Working Group of the Conservation Finance Alliance. Welcome, Zdenka, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Magdalena, and thank you all for being here. Dave, it's great to follow you because I think your presentation is a great segue to what we're going to talk about now, which is how you can bring a lot of these different instruments together under a single cohesive strategy to try to achieve long-term, hopefully permanent conservation in many of the areas where we work. So I'm going to share a few slides on Enduring Earth, but mainly more than focusing on the initiative, I really want to focus on the tool that we use, which is the Project Finance for Permanence tool. And I'll just begin with, some of you might have seen this slide before. It really is a very simple slide, but to me, it is the most powerful slide in terms of its content, because for those of us who have worked in conservation for many, many years, we have sometimes worked in projects that have some of these components, but many of us recognize that unless all of these 5 enabling conditions are present, really thinking about reaching sustainability is quite difficult. For example, many of us have worked in defining very important ecological areas, but there is no point in having these ecological areas if we're not really thinking about the community surrounding these areas, or if we're not thinking about the institutions that will provide the sustenance and the stewardship for these areas. Likewise, if we don't have the financial resources to actually protect these areas, it's going to be difficult. So all 5 of these elements really have to come together to achieve sustainability. Ecological, as I said, really looking at the long-term health of the ecosystem. Social, because we recognize, of course, that we must support those who live in or near some of these most important areas, as well as their own benefits. And Dave, you mentioned some of that in your presentation as well. Political, because we do need high-level political commitment and political commitment at all scales to ensure that what we're trying to protect remains over time as well. And I'll explain how all these come to play into some of these tools. Organizational, because there's always the institutions that are behind this, whether it's the NGOs, organized civil society, other types, conservation trust funds, other institutions that remain, even as politics change, these institutions have the capacity to remain. And financial, which is, of course, crucial and what we're here to talk about. But the truth is that you can have all the money in the world, that if you don't have the other conditions in place, the right institutions to actually manage those funds, get them where they need to go, the right politics to ensure that that you actually have the right policies in place, then there is no point in just thinking about money. So just a reminder that all of these 5 elements have to come into play when we think about long-lasting conservation. And so based on this, we have been working for over 15 years. Actually, this year marks the 15th anniversary of Forever Costa Rica. So probably around 18 years in trying to put into practice a tool which comes and is borrowed from the private sector, which is Project Finance for Permanence. But how can we actually apply that to conservation? And a PFP sounds like a very complicated arrangement, and there are many components to it. But in the end, really all it is it's an agreement in which a big group of stakeholders, including indigenous peoples, local communities, government, civil society, private and public donors, all come together to develop a conservation vision, a community and conservation vision for an area, whether sometimes it's at a national scale, sometimes it's at a regional scale, sometimes it's at a subnational scale. But all of the stakeholders come together to build that vision. That vision can have a series of potential outcomes. These can be new biodiversity protection, creation of new conservation areas. It can be ways in which we can strengthen community development, look for new economic opportunities. It can have effective management opportunities. It's not only about creating areas, but also about effectively managing and sustaining those that we have. It's a vision that allows to understand some of the coordinated policy landscape. Policy incoherence many times is the biggest cause of us not having the financial resources we need. And so how can we actually correct that in the process? And of course, what it's going to take to do this. And so there is a vision. That vision has a cost to actually implementing it, and it has a series of steps to get there. And what we actually then do is go and fund that vision. And to do that, we create an agreement, which has a series of core components, which I'll speak to about in more detail. But so what this really is a Project Finance for Permanence is an agreement by a group of stakeholders that allows for financing and implementing a long-term vision for conservation. So what this really looks like in practice, and I'll talk about the PFPs that have been done around the world, is there is a process by which this is all created, where all stakeholders come together, where this conservation vision is drafted, where a series of outcomes are decided, and a series of core components are discussed and negotiated. Because at the end of this game, really what we're talking about is an agreement of all parties. And so all this happens in what we call our planning and development stage, which can take a series. Sometimes it takes a couple of years. Some have been short, a couple of years. Some have taken a little longer. But there is a moment when we have a single closing, when all of this comes together and all of the different stakeholders sign the agreement. The money is actually delivered. The institution that will actually implement this money, which is a conservation trust fund, is ready to do that. And what you have is a capital that you have raised, that you put into usually a transition fund. Sometimes we also have endowments, and most of the time we have a mix of both transition fund and endowment. And so this money will fund the conservation vision. But the transition fund means that every year you'll have a little less money that will come in to fund the conservation vision for a period of time. Here in this example, it's year 10. Sometimes it's 15 years. In the case of Brazil, it was 25 years. In some other cases, it's all been endowment, like in the case of Costa Rica. But what happens is, the premise behind this is, as your capital that you've been able to raise continues to decrease throughout the years, as you start meeting your goals and you start investing in your goals, your sustainable financing mechanisms need to increase. And so at the end, what you're really reaching is a balance where you're actually sustaining conservation in the long term, right? So you're building a bridge by being able to raise the funds for the PFP. What you're doing is building a bridge while governments and civil society have the capacity to build the right sustainable financing mechanisms to take over once this money starts drawing down. However, please note that there's a current finance level that needs to be maintained. That is basic. This money should not be here to supplement government funding or other sources of funding. It is here to complement and increase and enhance existing funding. So obviously, because of this, the PFP's permanence really relies on successful implementation of SFMs, which is why having these conversations is so important. And part of what we need to do is be creative in many aspects, of course, not only in SFMs, but it becomes especially important for SFMs because we're not looking at just any SFM. We're looking at sustainable finance mechanisms that can be applied at that can be applied at a large scale, that provide stable and recurring income flows that we have proved in the past or that we can help mature, and that have a certain ease of implementation and can be adaptable. And so a lot of the time that we spend when we create these project finance for permanence is thinking through with government, with the different stakeholders that I mentioned, what could those sustainable finance mechanisms look like that will allow over time for these sustainable finance mechanisms to actually bridge into the conservation vision. So a lot of what we do when we work on a PFP, it takes a lot of planning, like any big business deal, right? And so you start with a conservation plan, you build a finance model to understand how you're going to actually fund that conservation plan. That's going to have a series of financial reporting and performance monitoring. There is a moment when all of the money comes together and all of the conditions come together when you have your closing, and then you need to consider your sustainable funding mechanisms. And part of that is also considering potential new government commitments. So as you can see, 3 of our big core components are related to sustainable finance and looking for new mechanisms. Of course, you're going to have a conservation trust fund. You're going to have a series of disbursement conditions, which is really important. You're going to have an agreement with disbursement conditions, right? These conditions need to be met because we are not here to supplement, but actually to complement funding. So there's a series of conditions to ensure that that happens, as well as a series of safeguards and, of course, a series of closing conditions. And these closing conditions really are around policy enhancements and opportunities to ensure that when you're building these projects, you're actually building you're actually being able to address some of those policy incoherences, because you can put all the money into the world into one of these projects, that if you have policy incoherences, you're actually not really achieving effective conservation. So there is probably an inefficiency in the way in which you're investing those funds. And so to do this, these PFPs had been done over the past, as I said, 18 years in Canada. They had been tried in Costa Rica. They had been tried in Bhutan, Peru. But many organizations were doing this on their own. And a lot of the lessons learned weren't being replicated, scaled, or accelerated. So Enduring Earth comes together as a partnership between 4 founding members with a series of collaborators who come together to really create a partnership that allows for the acceleration of the use of this tool. And this has already proven to happen. We started 5 years ago with Enduring Earth. In these past 5 years, we're about to close 10 PFPs, which means we're going to, if we had done 5 PFPs in 15 years and now we're doing 10 PMPs in 5 years, it proves that there is a theory of acceleration here, which is when we come together, when we share lessons learned, when we learn from each other, there is a greater possibility of closing more of these projects around the world. And so we started with a goal. We're working right now on our new vision. This still hasn't been completely approved, but we're trying to scale our ambition. We began with an ambition of 600 million hectares, and we're well underway. We've already, through these PFP mechanisms, helped to ensure the right mechanisms to protect around 207 million hectares. We've been able to mobilize around $1 billion, and that has helped leverage an incredible amount of funding as well across many of the places where we're working, and to work with many partners. And why this is important also to this conversation is, look, this is not only about delivering Target 3. This is also about sustaining what we're trying to deliver on Target 3. It's not about reaching 30%. It's about sustaining and effectively managing the 30%. And so besides creating the protected areas, besides really thinking of what it takes to get there, how are we going to sustain it over time? That is part of your conservation vision. What does effective management look like? What's it going to take to get there? And then Target 19 is something we don't talk enough about, but it is absolutely essential to meet Target 3 that we think about Target 19, how we can mobilize long-term sustainable finance. And part of what we need to do is leverage funds from, public sector, from private sector, and ensure that there is a synergistic use of these funds. And that is really what we're trying to do. When we leverage funds through a project finance for permanence, we're bringing together all of these different sectors and leveraging, as you saw, there's a leverage of more than a one-to-one leverage in all of the places in which we're working, which has allowed us to deliver not only in Target 3, but also, most importantly, also in Target 19. These are some of the places where we're working. And as you can see in orange, we have our planning stage. So these are places that will be hopefully closing soon. And then our implementation stage, which is the places in which we're closed. And just to say, it's difficult to know when to actually call success for many of these projects, because the minute you close the deal doesn't mean you've protected all the hectares. It just means you have a plan to protect them and you have the funding to do that. It really takes the implementation of these PFPs. That is where the fun begins. And so a lot of what we're working on now is, as we start closing many of these project finance for permanence deals around the world, hopefully ending this year with more than 10 protected created over the past 5 years. And as we think over the next 5 years, where we hope to at least double that ambition and create at least another 20, we're thinking 30 plus all the ones that exist. Well, how are we going to actually ensure that we're implementing these PFPs? And that is where the fun begins also, because that's where all of these SFMs also come into play. So a lot of work ahead for all of us. Also, as you can see in this map, a lot of the work has really focused on this, in Latin America, a lot of work in Canada, and some work in Asia. In these next 5 years, we hope to really change that and have a lot more emphasis on the work that we do in Africa and Asia. And so we've determined a series of places in our opportunity set. These are just, our scientists coming together and saying, these are places where we want to make sure that we have greater opportunities to seek project finance for permanence. Not every place, not every geography is applicable to project finance for permanence, because all of these enabling conditions need to be in place. And it's part of what we look at, will we have the right government commitment? Will we have, yes, from a biodiversity perspective, this map makes sense, but when we look at the other enabling conditions, will we have the right institutionality? Will we have the right opportunities to create these sustainable finance mechanisms and work with communities, et cetera? So part of what we do is analyze and assess what we can do in each one of these places. Lastly, I'll say, again, as I was mentioning, the Target 3 contribution, we're really hoping we can continue to advance. We're in a good pathway, in a good drumbeat as we move forward in terms of creating new PFPs, but also in terms of mobilizing funding. And so we're hoping that we can continue to leverage some funding for bringing in all of the different stakeholders and opportunities from public, private, new sustainable finance mechanisms and commitments that can come forth to make these PFPs a reality. So a lot of work, but a really good opportunity to bring a lot of what we're discussing here together into a single comprehensive deal that can hopefully have long-lasting results for many of the geographies in which we work. So I'll stop there and turn it back to you, Magdalena. I don't know if there's time for questions now or later. And if there's any questions on the chat, I'll address them after this presentation is over.
Well, thank you so much, Zdenka. Impressive, already 10 PFPs and 207 million hectares, $1 million. And I really like the way it is organized between the different partners, like to really think on bridging what you term, on bridging the long-term vision of conservation that is going to be financed. And I also really enjoy the way that you put, this is not only Target 3, we are also thinking about Target 10. So, well, great work. I really want to continue learning more about what you guys are doing. We will have a period of Q&As at the end of the presentation. So welcome. You can continue writing your questions, and maybe the panelists can respond directly within the chat, but we will have a period, like an open period for questions and answer at the end of all the presentations. So we will continue with so thank you, Zdenka. We will continue with Candice. Welcome, Candice. Candice Stevens leads the Sustainable Finance Coalition and is co-chair of the IUCN-WCPA Sustainable Finance Specialist Group. Candice is a visionary in nature, finance, and sustainable solutions, and leverages her expertise to find and design innovative finance solutions for preserving our natural landscapes and seascapes and benefiting the people that are their custodians. Her groundbreaking work in innovative finance for nature has garnered prestigious recognition, including the UN Pathfinder Award, Special Commendation, EcoLogic Awards, Greening the Future, Biodiversity Heroes, and Mulago Foundation Fellowship. So thank you, Candice, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Magdalena. It's fantastic to be with so many colleagues from around the world. Hello from sunny South Africa. So I'm going to share a little bit around the work of the Sustainable Finance Coalition that happens across the African continent, and importantly, how that feeds up into the IUCN-WCPA Sustainable Finance Specialist Group, and much of what my co-chair David has shared earlier. And importantly, drill down into some practical approaches that protected and conserved area stakeholders can use in being able to identify the most viable sustainable finance solutions for their own contexts, and then being able to effectively design and build those out. And I think Zdenka's graph that she showed around the PFP, that component around sustainable finance and being able to identify the right mechanisms is a great launch point for the focus on the finance model that we're utilizing in Africa to do just that. So really, what the coalition's role is across the African continent is to work alongside stakeholders in protected and conserved areas, governments, for-profit companies across the corporate sector, numerous different community associations and locally led organizations to work in collaboration together to unlock the doors to financial opportunity. Often what we hear from the stakeholders that we are engaging across numerous landscapes and seascapes is that they know there's finance out there, they're just not quite sure how to unlock it. What we hear from many of our private sector partners in the African context is that they want to be involved in new and innovative financial instruments and mechanisms, but want to be able to embed themselves into something concrete and a project that they can really get behind. And so what we've developed within the coalition network, and when I say we, I mean the extent of many organizations and experts working shoulder to shoulder, is to develop a specific approach to unlocking those very niche and tailored finance solutions, but at the same time also utilizing financial opportunities that are most viable and most present in a landscape. I think David pointed this out really nicely when he set the stage for us. There are new and exciting innovations out there, but there are also some stock standard processes and financial opportunities that we can't lose sight of. And so what we've done is captured this process in a 3-part finance model that any group of stakeholders can use in any different landscape or seascape, and that is to find, design, and mobilize finance for nature. When we talk about the first part of the finance model in FIND, it's a process that enables stakeholders to identify the right finance solution for the right place with the right people. So often we'll hear from stakeholders that they've spent large amounts of time and money in pursuing a financial opportunity that didn't materialize, that stayed as an idea for a very long time, or it stayed at a small pilot scale and didn't reach that big finish line that we're all after. So we've identified a number of different finance solutions that have been built into a finance solution inventory, very Africa specific, but translatable across the world. And importantly, put forward a process that allows stakeholders to really narrow down the search. Which sustainable finance opportunities are the most realistic for them? And when we know we're onto a good thing, that's when we step into the second part of the model on design. And this is really to take an idea into implementation and drive it towards clear impact, financial returns that attach to concrete conservation and social outcomes on the ground. Every finance solution is different. It requires different expertise. It requires a different amount of time. David pointed this out. We want to be able to address the cost and complexity that it takes to get new finance solutions off the ground. And that's exactly what the design process does, so that we're able to take the complexity of nature finance and put it into a very clear roadmap with milestones that drive momentum, that with impact parameters that ensure that it's not just about increasing the amount of finance available, but ensuring that it reaches the most targeted conservation impact on the ground. But it's simply not possible to do this alone. I think Zdenka said this so well. It requires a huge amount of collaboration. And so the mobilized part of the finance model really harnesses the power of collective action. It pulls together experts, organizations across a wide range of activities to be able to work together and come around the same table for a common purpose. So importantly, when we're looking at starting that sustainable finance journey, this is really the point that we introduce the finance model. We know that there are financial needs out there. We know that they're quite extreme, regardless of what context we're looking at. And we also know that there are a lot of different opportunities out there. So we start by scoping all possible finance solutions to identify the most viable. Like I mentioned earlier, we have an inventory where we're building in a lot of innovations off the African continent. It's quite an exciting space. But importantly, there are a lot of existing efforts. There are a lot of collaborative efforts that are happening. We never want to duplicate effort and rather leverage what already exists. And so putting all of that on the table and then quickly being able to create a shortlist. We utilize a fine scorecard, a rapid intuitive robot system. You'll see the green, yellow, and red icon there to be able to whittle down that very long list into a doable shortlist. And then importantly, put that into a selection process using detailed technical criteria, subject matter experts, to be able to have clear criteria that breaks down that shortlist into the most viable finance solutions. And this gives participants in the sustainable finance journey the best start to that process. And what we're seeing across the footprint in Africa is that numerous different conservation actors on the nature side of the coin, as well as many different governments and financial private sector players on the finance side of the coin, are engaging in more concrete finance solutions as a result of this process. As I mentioned, the design process is really around putting those milestone parameters and timelines in place. We utilize really structured incubators to catalyze new finance solutions. We utilize implementation task teams to drive piloted or long-standing finance solutions, and ultimately all with the single purpose of being able to take individual finance solutions over that finish line. And what we mean by that is we want to see concrete flows of finance reaching those protected and conserved areas, driving our ambitions to target 3. And importantly, tying in an integrated way into other finance solutions and other finance efforts, like PFPs, like conservation trust funds, and many other mechanisms. There simply isn't a silver bullet to answering the question. And so designing finance solutions for impact and designing them in an integrated way gives us the best chance of addressing that nature finance gap. So I touched on this a little bit, really the power of collective action, and it can't be underestimated. But something I do want to really emphasize is the coalition's process in walking shoulder to shoulder with conservation actors on the ground. It's critically important that we're able to support and provide as much capacity as possible, something that the specialist group on sustainable finance does at a global level, that CFA and the coalition do, building in capacity, building in expertise so that we are able to really walk the sustainable finance journey alongside protected and conserved area actors. We aim for this timeline in taking an idea right the way through to impact. We'll often hear from communities that we work with that this seems rather too fast. We'll hear from a lot of private sector partners in the African context that this is quite slow. But really the coalition's role is to build those two different sectors together and have a meeting of the minds that drive us forward in momentum. So basically, what we really are seeing achieve huge results in the on the African basis is the two critical keys in the coalition. The first being our finance model, which I've unpacked now, just a clear process to be able to identify, design those finance solutions and mobilize the right people to be able to support them. And then importantly, doing it together, having committed organizations that are part and parcel of the sustainable finance journey so that they're able to come alongside and drive the development of those new solutions. There's no one expert, no one organization that is able to do this alone. And so that commitment from various different organizations and experts in utilizing the finance model has been a critical key to unlocking some of these new and exciting opportunities. Just a snapshot of the footprint where the finance model is currently being utilized. You'll see it's covering Southern and East Africa, and the Southwest Indian Oceans. And just a few examples of some of the finance solutions that have been unlocked with a range of different partners utilizing the finance model, and really honing in on the fact that financing nature can be very practical, it can be very actionable, and it can be very tailored to the specific protected and conserved areas that we're working in. One of the examples is an impact fund that we have recently incubated, implemented, and it's reached the cusp of impact, which is incredibly exciting. This has happened in an 8-month period, so it just shows the speed at which we're able to take an idea through to implementation and ultimately to impact. This specific impact fund is looking at targeting target 3 around marine, so marine protected areas and marine OECMs, but also importantly supporting the blue economy and sustainable economic growth. Within the African context, regardless of which country we're working in, the imperative around sustainable economic development remains absolutely paramount. And something that we work alongside numerous different governments with and numerous different organizations in the private sector is the realization that many of Africa's opportunities sit within our natural asset base. And so building on those opportunities in the blue economy and specifically targeting them around target 3 in marine, seeing that built into an impact fund dedicated specifically for that. So hopefully we're going to be able to share some really exciting news on this space and support a lot of blue economic growth around strategic target 3 areas along Africa's coastlines. Something else that is, again, quite new and exciting, there's been a lot of talk globally around biodiversity credits, and importantly, how biodiversity credits link with carbon credits, how they can be stacked, should it be insetting, etc. Many different discussions and debates on that topic. What we've done with a range of different partners in Africa is set up an African Buyers Club, and this is specifically to address the supply side of biodiversity credits. There are many great and exciting biodiversity credit developments in numerous different countries, but being able to see those credits actually sold and finance flow back down into those landscapes is something that we're working together with partners to be able to strategically address. Something on the supply side that's been missing for quite a long time is a dedicated meet and match between the right buyer and the right project on the ground. And we're really hoping that this is going to be able to scale up some of those purchase agreements. I can never talk about sustainable finance without mentioning tax. For those who know me well, they'll know that I'm a total tax nerd. And importantly, something that's often overlooked in discussions around Target 3 is the fact that Target 18 specifically is there for us to be able to address harmful subsidies, but as well as creating positive incentives. Something that is often overlooked in the sustainable finance discussions is the fact that we need to be able to address where we're losing finance and creating damage as a result of harmful subsidies. And so positive incentives are a really strategic way of not only addressing our sustainable finance needs, but also addressing policy and behavioral change. So something that we've done within the South African context specifically is work alongside government, the National Treasury, South African Revenue Service, Department of Environment, and many other NGO partners to be able to create dedicated tax incentives that attach to protected and conserved areas in country. And so South Africa has been able to not only report on benefits for Target 3, but also Target 18 at the same time. This particular tax incentive attaches to a candidate OECM in South Africa, which is dedicated towards the highest level of conservation management for threatened species. The reality on the ground is that many of South Africa's threatened species don't sit within national protected areas. They sit on privately or communally owned lands and are incredibly expensive to protect. If we think about the cost of anti-poaching for rhinos, for example, and that cost is being borne by ordinary South Africans. And so this tax deduction allows them to deduct all management-related expenses that link to those threatened species on their land that's recognized as a candidate OECM. Importantly, I think, is that within the South African context, we're really addressing protected areas and OECMs in a mosaic landscape approach. So really seeing large contiguous landscapes that are integrated and then applying finance in an integrated way at the same time. Another one of the tax incentives in South Africa, and something that I want to just emphasize here, is the fact that regardless of how different the different types of tax incentives are, or how tailored they are for specific context, they have the same fundamental building blocks, the same foundational ingredients that we use to create this protected area tax incentive were used to create the OECM threatened species tax incentive. And these building blocks through the coalition's finance model are what are being looked at by many other countries, again, to determine would tax incentives be the ideal finance solution for them, should they pursue something like this? And obviously, no tax incentive is going to look the same. No finance solution is going to look the same in any given context, but we have stock standard building blocks that allow us to replicate these across jurisdictions or scale them up within individual countries. This protected area tax incentive attaches to private or communally owned protected areas. It's covering just over 500,000 hectares of protected area in South Africa. And as of 2024, had introduced $30 million of finance into the South African protected area state. And importantly, finance that wasn't available before. And I think that's an important consideration. So I hope this gives a snapshot of how practical sustainable finance can be when we start the journey right, when we design effectively, and when we do it together.
Thank you so much, Candice. I was really interested about the tax incentives, like the positive incentives, and also like reducing the harmful subsidies. And I also really enjoyed the way you talk about collaboration and collective action to achieve these goals. Wow, really interesting presentation. I really need to continue learning more about the work that you guys are doing in South Africa. So thank you so much. We will continue with Alonso Martinez. Alonso is the LAC Environmental Finance Advisor with the Global BioFin team. He has a master's in Economic and Environmental and Energy Policy from University College London. He began his career at the National Commission of Natural Protected Areas in Mexico, contributing to estimating the financial gap of protected areas and developing economic valuation of ecosystem services. And during his career, he has contributed to integrating the economic and financial approach into public policy for the conservation of biodiversity. So over to you, Alonso. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Magdalena. Colleagues, I'm going to start sharing my presentation. Just a second. Are you able to see it? No. I'm not sure what's happening with my computer right now. Wow.
Well, in the meantime, while Alonso figure out how to fix this, I would like to invite the speaker to respond some of the questions in the Q&A. We will have a Q&A session, so some of the questions we can leave them for that moment. And if you want to answer, I think you have been already answering some, well, please, you can continue to do so. No?
Now you can see it, maybe?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Perfect. Can you see it in full screen, Magdalena? Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Well, thanks again for the invitation. My name is Alonso Martinez. I work for Biofin Initiative here in Latin America and the Caribbean. And as some of you know, the Biofin Initiative is focused on diversifying, incrementing resources, but also reducing future harms and future expenditures for biodiversity. So our methodology that we have been proving and strengthening for the last 13, 12 years globally is based upon understanding the needs and objectives of the NBSAPs, the National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plans, and to understand within the NBSAPs which objectives, which goals are set in each of the countries, and how much would it take to finance and to achieve these goals. So our basic model is that we know that we have, of course, a financial gap, but we don't know how much of, in terms of resources, in terms of capacities, this financial gap is amounting to. So the first steps of Biofin is understanding how much expenditure is going to the NBSAPs, and I'm going to talk about protected areas a bit later on, and how we can start creating portfolios, financial portfolios, to reduce this financial gap for the NBSAP. And of course, within the NBSAPs, and right now with Target 3, the idea is to understand and delve a bit into the protected areas programs within the countries and understand how much is needed to effectively manage protected areas, and right now, of course, other conservation measures. So the idea with Biofin, and this is something we have been doing for the last, as I said, 12 years in 40 countries, and now we expanded to over 130 countries, is to understand within the protected area systems the magnitude, the type of areas, if it's private protected areas, public protected areas, the extent in which these areas are constructed in each of the countries, and within these characteristics, start building financial portfolios. So right now, from our work, we have been identifying, or we have identified 51 protected areas financial mechanisms, and specifically 33 specifically to local communities. And within this scope and the countries that have been participating in financial mechanisms for protected areas, we have been identifying at least this list. So some examples from the Biofin Finance Solution Catalog that you can find online that we have been piloting is, of course, results-based budgeting. I'm going to talk about an example from Kazakhstan. Lobbying for public budget allocations. This is something that happens widely in our Biofin countries. Most Biofin countries, even if Biofin itself is not doing the lobbying with the legislative or executive powers, we do create and generate information that is useful for the protected areas managers and organizations, agencies, to go into the executive and legislative branches to do some lobbying, right? So this information relates, of course, to the financial gap, as I said, but also to economic values of protected areas, the dependency of the financial sector to protected areas, risk exposition from the financial and private sector to biodiversity degradation in protected areas. All this kind of information that is useful for agencies to go with these stakeholders and lobby for public budget allocations. But also, it doesn't relate only to the public sector. As we all know, public sector, we will not be ever sufficient to fund effectively our protected areas. So we have also been diversifying our work towards donations, the corporate sector, philanthropic, and the financial sector to really create this link, as I was saying, between environmental services coming from protected areas and their importance to private assets, to the financial sector, systemic risks, etc. Also, something that we have been working a lot is taxes and fees. I'm going to speak about that a bit more. And conservation or wildlife theme items. That's something that we have been doing also here in Mexico, not particularly with Biofin, but with the Protected Areas Commission. Entrance fees, of course, this is, I think, the most recurrent financial mechanism countries go, at least at the first, refer to, at least at the first stages. And of course, other PA and tourism fees. There are a lot of countries working on concessions within protected areas, on having relations with the tourism sector in terms of how much is coming with, from either boats, cruise ships, tourism services, etc., within the protected areas, and how the agencies could also benefit from this tourism using finance not only as a revenue source, but also using finance as an incentive and a disincentive to create some practices within protected areas, right? So Biofin goes, as I said, way more than just revenues and resources, but we also use economic incentives, economic mechanisms to try to incentivize or disincentivize some practices. And some other solutions that I wanted to raise during this presentation that relate more with communities. And it's not only solutions that come from the agencies of protected areas, but also from communities. Some human-wildlife conflict insurance. Right now, last year, actually, Argentina, in the province of Misiones, launched the first jaguar insurance. So this is basically an insurance to protect jaguars from human-wildlife conflicts, as they were, of course, going into farms, start killing some of the animals in the farms. So Biofin, with the province, created this insurance, and it pays almost immediately to the farmers when a jaguar attacks, right? So that is, of course, has the objective to decrease human-wildlife conflict and to eliminate retaliation from farmers to jaguars. Concession agreements, this is something that is widely used in protected areas, but some of the most interesting mechanisms come from Costa Rica. Costa Rica has a great system of concessions within their protected areas. Impact investment, this is something that we have also been piloting here in Latin America, as protected areas are, of course, people live within the protected areas. So we are also trying to find ways into how impact investment could diversify economic activities for communities within protected areas or surrounding protected areas. Trust funds, payment for ecosystem services. There's a lot of conversations going on related to additionality in protected areas, related to PES, but we also work with communities living in protected areas. As you know, most protected areas in the world are not strictly for conservation. Most of them are inhabited or have some human activities. So we also have to understand this context and create some of the mechanisms that will allow people to live from the protected areas and within the protected areas. Sustainable tourism, crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is something that Costa Rica, Ecuador, and right now Cuba are piloting. In Costa Rica, there's a really successful campaign for afforestation and reforestation in the country. And right now in Cuba, we're piloting a project for crowdfunding in a protected area called Ciénegas de Zapata for protecting the Cuban crocodile, an endemic species from the country. Carbon markets, this also relates a lot with additionality, and we can speak about that later on. Green bonds and compensation for planned environmental damage. I highlighted this solution as I think it relates to biodiversity credits in a way. What we have been discussing here in Biofin in countries like Mexico, Colombia, Peru, is that carbon biodiversity credits for compensations are a really innovative and potential solution to create better compensations using the basis and the methodologies that have been developed for biodiversity credits. So how we can use the construction of biodiversity units and habitat banking, not only to create private markets, but also to use these methodologies into creating habitat banks within protected areas as a way to strengthen environmental damage compensation. So there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of conversation from Biofin and UNDP through the Biodiversity Credit Alliance that you can also review online. So just because of the time, I'm going to speak about some of the practical examples of our work within the countries, just 5-6 examples. So in Botswana, what Biofin did in Botswana was creating and updating, better said, the protected areas entrance fees. So the problem with Botswana was that they did charge some entrance fees, but these fees were outdated, not even for inflation. They were not revised for more than 20 years. And what we did in Botswana was to understand first the baseline, what we were working with. Well, 3 types of fees: national, regional, internationally. They were comparatively low against neighborhood countries. And as I said, not even an adjustment related to inflation occurred in these years. So what we did was creating the information, the analysis, the study, cost-benefit study to support a legislative update. And the final result was, in the first year only, 7.8 million increase for protected areas. And this is also something that will be incrementing in the future. So the projection was originally for 36 million in 10 years. And well, we are working on that in Botswana. So just a quick example of how the information and just setting the stage on baseline fees, on the opportunities and the benefits of adjusting these fees resulted in a quick win for Botswana protected areas. Then, as I said, Kazakhstan worked with results-based budgeting in protected areas. As in Botswana, Biofin supported the creation and the generation of information to inform this RBB. And the final result was that the protected areas funding reached 70.3 million in 2023, and it was a 3-fold increase compared to 2018. So just by reviewing the way protected areas were budgeted within the national budgeting process, that resulted in a 3-fold increase. This is something that we are also working here in Mexico, for example, on how we can support the National Commission in strengthening their budgeting processes to allow them to not only receive the 100% of entrance fees, but start incrementing those fees in the future. This is something that a lot of countries share within the Biofin spectrum. So also in Kazakhstan, ecotourism certifications, biodiversity offsets, as I said, piloting a lot how we can use compensations and offsetting for protected areas, biodiversity carbon markets, and well, a company called BitFury also signed an agreement for $1 million for forest carbon offset projects within protected areas. So this is something also quite useful. In Vietnam, this is a similar story for the one in Botswana, but Vietnam didn't really charge. I mean, it's already charging in some protected areas, but there wasn't nationwide policy on protected areas fees. So Biofin also work a lot with the government creating information, a pilot also in Hon Khao Marine Protected Area, and right now Vietnam is already charging entrance fees for some of their protected areas, and is looking to inform the diversification and strengthening of these protected areas nationwide. In Mexico, as I said, we worked a lot with our National Commission for Protected Areas on specifically budgeting and how we can strengthening budget processes, but also Biofin in 2019 started working with the Commission in creating and generating information for them to increase the protected areas fees. So in 2019, CONAMP, the Commission, was generating around USD 1.5 million only, and right now they're generating around 15 million. So an increase of 10 times the generation of revenues just by strengthening their budgeting processes, start generating more revenue and incrementing their entrance fees. So it was a 10 times increase for Mexico. Well, in Thailand, also a lot of work related to sustainable tourism. As you know, some of the protected areas in Thailand are visited heavily by tourists, and this was becoming, of course, a problem in terms of management, of pollution, of natural degradation of protected areas. So right now, Biofin in Thailand is working in sustainable tourism, increasing sources for revenue, particularly in Koh Tao, with over 175,000 collected. Crowdfunding solution, as in Costa Rica or Cuba, they are working also for Koh Tao in a campaign called Better Together for COVID-19 green recovery, and this raised around 100 USD for local communities that were working in protecting and safeguarding the protected area. Also, private sector solutions for mangrove management, and in Philippines, for example, in 2018, also using a lot of Biofin information, the Philippines expanded their protected areas, but also significantly increased budget for their management. So this is just another example of how information can produce and can strengthen legislative processes, and in Philippines resulted as well in a 70% increase for protected areas budget. Then I know I'm a bit late, and this is the last one, Magdalena, but I wanted to share it with you because I think it's quite interesting. In Costa Rica, Biofin is working with the legislative and the Ministry of Finance and Economy to create a green bond for protected areas. So not going into the specifics, but the general idea of this green bond is to raise money for infrastructure within protected areas to create better management facilities, infrastructure, entrance fees, etc. within year zero. So you raise money through a bond to create and strengthen the infrastructure, and the bond is going to be paid through the increment of entrance fees. So it's an amazing way, I think, and quite innovative to address the problem of infrastructure of management, of effective presence of the Commission within areas to charge, to safeguard the areas by installing and creating infrastructure. And how you link that to the future is by the entrance fees. So just a way to think a bit outside of the box and not only increment entrance fees, but how you can use these financial instruments to favor and to create an effective protected area system within the country. So I'm going to leave it at that just because of the time, but happy to discuss any doubts, any questions, and continue the conversation afterwards. Thank you, Magdalena.
Thank you so much, Alonso. Critical to review the budget within the national budget process for protected and conserved areas, process that, well, I've been also in charge of that in my past life, and it's critical, but it's also challenging to negotiate with the government and to balance the different needs. Thank you so much for showing all the cases, and I look forward to learn more about the Green Bond. So thank you, Alonso, and we will continue with Stephanie. Stephanie Lang has started as Executive Director for Legacy Landscape Fund in April 2021. She has a master's degree in social anthropology and completed a second master's degree in leadership and organizational development in 2019. Stephanie has worked for more than 25 years in conservation, in bilateral, multilateral, and NGO organization, as well as in the private sector. She lived and worked abroad for 18 years in Jordan, Latvia, Belgium, in East Africa, and Southeast Asia. So thank you, and over to you, Stephanie.
Very much, Magdalena. Thanks for your time. Thank you very much to all the colleagues who are still listening. Let me try to put it in full presentation mode, but it doesn't seem to work like that. So, now it comes. So now from a very, very broad presentation that we had with the super innovative models, we come to a bit more, let's say, traditional down-to-earth model, which is just also in the book of David. It's a conservation trust fund. Legacy Landscapes Fund is a conservation trust fund that was created because everybody says that there is a gap in long-term programmatic area-based conservation funding. What we have, especially with public sector, is that they fund projects, the project from 3 to 5 years. And by the time the project really runs, those people who have been on the ground doing conservation know you already have to think about exiting this project because the money ends, or asking for phase 2. So what Legacy Landscape Fund is doing is to try to change the way public sector funding is given through this conservation trust fund. Our funding is for 15 years or even for perpetuity, so 50 plus years. And the funding is given with $1 million per year to NGOs and indigenous peoples organizations who can prove that they are able to absorb that money. And that is just the base money. And then all those other innovative funding mechanisms like tax breaks, like everything else needs to come, because normally large areas need much more than just $1 million. But that is a good start for those costs that are recurring costs, operational costs. And it gives everybody a breathing space to be more innovative, to look for the extra funding. We apply a programmatic approach, so not a project approach, but a program approach. We all know that conservation is changing every day, every year. You might have a flood that takes away your infrastructure. You might have a disease that breaks out and you have to vaccinate animals because there's a problematic disease. So we apply this programmatic approach, saying that every year you can use that money in a different way where it's most needed. We link conservation and human rights from the start. I will talk a little bit more later because we have an equitable conservation approach. We need to change beneficiaries, indigenous peoples, from just a beneficiary to an equitable partner approach. And we target large conservation areas. A landscape for us is the conservation area and the buffer zone, and not only the conservation area, because the buffer zones, the areas around, have a lot of influence on of how the conservation area is doing. And we combine public sector funding with private sector, with philanthropic sector or corporate sector funding to have one delivery mechanism, also one reporting line, which also helps the people on the ground to reduce reporting complexities. So this is how we do the granting. We have calls for proposals. We just finished a call for proposal. The deadline was last night, and we have 127 concept notes now for the next round of funding, which shows the interest. And this is the landscapes we already have right now. So we have 10 that are funded under the 15-year model, and we have 5 that are funded under the perpetual grant model. But we have, of course, now hopefully more funding for new programs to join the Legacy Landscapes Fund in the future with this call for proposal. What is important here is that we just started 4 years ago as Legacy Landscapes, but now we started with about $80 million that was given as an initial kickoff funding from the German government. Now we have already 400 million capitalized, also with all the other match funders that join in with a match funding. We are trying to be very lean, so we are not siphoning off a lot of money when the money comes to us. We have less than 5% admin costs with a small team of just 8 people in Germany, with a total budget at the moment of 16 million that we deploy. So that is stretching the team a lot of times, but we think it's important, that shows our added value, that we're not taking too much admin costs. We have now 15 key biodiversity areas under contract. That is about what is 450 million hectares, about that. And we are stronger and even more strong on the rights and governance of indigenous peoples. We now even have launched a direct funding window for indigenous peoples in that current call for proposal that we just launched this year. So we want to broaden our implementer partners base from NGOs that work with indigenous people to now even directly indigenous peoples and local communities. We measure our impact with KPIs, with regular monitoring that is across the board. So we have a KPI system that has the same indicators across the whole portfolio, but then the metrics are linked to the areas and the realities on the ground. And we are having a learning and sharing community of practice. So those 15 areas are all meeting now in Berlin for a week of joint learning and sharing to try to transfer lessons learned from one area to another, from one continent to another, and to be more collaborative in problem solving than just trying to invent everything from scratch in one place. So this is what area-based legacy landscapes look like. We have one area that is needs to be at least 1,000 square kilometers of heavily protected, so IUCN 1 or 2. And then the rest around it is really decided by the realities on the ground. It can be a buffer zone, it can be a community-based management zone, it can be a community forest, whatever. But for us, the core is to build this area-based conservation around a protected area under IUCN 1 or 2 in order to ensure the integrity of this area. So this is what I mentioned before. We are very proud of our environmental and social safeguard system, which is not only implemented while the grant is running, but even before, with initiation. We do a lot of environmental and social due diligence before we even look at the granting. And then during the granting, we have an environmental and social action program that is implemented. And then we do integrate it into monitoring and evaluation. And that brings also our implementing partner along that kind of vision change from only conservation to much more integration of local people, much more social benefits, much more gender awareness, and so on. So we are also implementing a bit of a paradigm shift within our conservation actors. And now, wait, that's the last slide. Oops, no, sorry, no, I skipped the last slide. This is the last slide here, where you can see the areas that we have currently under grants. So you can see we are working in the Global South predominantly with ODA eligible countries. And you can see that it's also our focus at the moment is also where the mega diverse countries are, the mega biodiversity across the tropical forest belt, some also within Ononbalj in Mongolia, because this is such a sensitive country in terms of climate change and water. So we are trying to balance out our portfolio across landscapes, across countries, across conservation problems, across solutions that are suggested, across implementing partners, and also across match funders, so that we really build this variety of partners, that we learn from each other and push conservation solutions across the portfolio within our Legacy Landscapes Fund portfolio. That's all from me. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Super interesting, the two kind of fundings that you guys have, and that fund in perpetuity, and impressive that you have funding for all the region in the Global South. Maybe not all the regions, but it's represented in the different continents. So I'm looking forward to learn more what happened with the applications that you got yesterday,
Yes.
and also maybe to inform the people that is here when it's going to be the next call. So that could be interesting as well. Thank you so much. Super interesting.
Thank you.
Our next and last speaker is Renee Gonzalez. Renee is a biologist with a PhD from Harvard University. She joined the Mexican Fund for Conservation of Nature, FMCN, in 1997, leading the Fund for Protected Areas. By 2004, she became the FMCN's Director of Conservation, and in 2020, its General Director. Renee is a founding member of several organizations, including the Mexico chapter of the Ecological Society of America and the Women in Nature Network. She serves on multiple advisory boards and has established 5 regional environmental funds. She's also fluent in 4 languages as well. Impressive. Over to you, Renee. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it's wonderful to actually be the last one to speak, since a lot of what I'm going to say actually builds on the experience of my previous colleagues. So let me share the screen with you guys. I hope it can be, I think it's not now full screen, should be full screen now. Is that correct, Magdalena? Great, thank you. Well, I just want to take you through a journey of 28 years of working with protected areas and from the experience in Mexico. So we are one environmental fund. We are one of 110. There's in Latin America and the Caribbean, there's a network which includes 34 environmental funds. We're going to be meeting in 3 weeks in Chile. And in Mexico, we are the fund that is actually the first national direct access entity accredited by the Green Climate Fund, and with active projects in Mexico. We have 2 that are already active, so I will talk about them in a minute. And we are also the main executing agency of the Global Environment Facility. So in historical numbers through 30 years, I want to just focus your attention on the last figure, the 53 million hectares. We, of course, when I say we, I refer to the royal we. It's a lot of organizations that actually work together in Mexico. And as my colleagues have stated before, this is an act of many, so it can only be built with alliances and collaborations, as Stephanie already pointed out. This is a work of many. And so 53 million is just only half of what we have in protected areas in Mexico, so we still have a long ways to go. Over 28 years, we built a coalition with the National Commission for Protected Areas that Alonso just mentioned. CONAMP is actually the entity, the government entity that administers the federal protected areas in Mexico. And they do the hard work of having, people on the ground that do surveillance, sustainable management, restoration, and ecotourism. As a conservation trust fund, what we do is receive funds from abroad, mainly abroad, but also national funds. We actually manage them, provide financial management to endowment funds, and then we provide technical and administrative support. In technical, a lot of it is planning, just defining those indicators that Stephanie was just talking about. We do have a partnership. We see all the communities as partners, never as beneficiaries. We don't like that word, as just Stephanie just stated. And those partnerships with local communities and local NGOs, all sorts of cooperatives, grassroots organizations. What we have found out through the years is that in Mexico, protected areas are very different from other countries, and land has been owned and occupied for centuries by local communities, Afro-descendants, indigenous communities, and all sorts of groups. And when they actually stay there for a long time, they know a lot about what they're doing. And what we've seen over time is that those territories that actually are occupied in what we call biosphere reserves have a better rate of actually maintaining the natural habitat. And we have a daily administration by local organizations. We cannot provide the money directly to CONAMP when it comes from private and international public sources. So we actually resort to local NGOs that develop their capacities for administering funds, and that allows them to actually access local funding that would otherwise not go into protected areas. In terms of governance, governance is an extremely important thing. We have seen that governance is completely tied to better use of natural resources. So over 28 years, we have a committee. It's the technical committee for the Fund for Protected Areas. This technical committee has representatives of all sectors of society. It's a lean committee. It's 9 people. It's actually presided by the CONAMP. And they actually determine whether the funds should or not go to the different protected areas. If they comply with all the requirements, which is mainly that, there's a planning process with the local communities through an advisory council that is local at the protected area level.
We lost you, Rene.
The years, we have actually allowed to build this up. In terms of impact, there's been quite a bit of studies. There's one ongoing right now that we are talking with the European Space Agency to do comparisons of those protected areas that have this kind of funding and those that do not have it. And, back in 2015, when this was actually determined, then there was a study done by Matt Hansen from the University of Maryland. And he actually compared the pairwise comparisons between those protected areas with funding and without funding, and determined that there was a 23% reduction in deforestation in protected areas supported by the Fund for Protected Areas. Over the years, 28 years has allowed us to build an endowment. The endowment started with $16.7 million in 1997, the first GF project in Mexico. And over the years, it grew to $177 million. And in addition to that, we have resources that are non-endowment. So we have 60 protected areas in Mexico that have an endowment earmarked for them, and 35 protected areas that are right now receiving non-endowment resources. That allows us to cover at this moment 95 protected areas to ensure the basic effective management, as has been shown with impact assessments. In terms of GF contributions, our biggest donors, as I said at the very beginning, 42% of the GF resources that have been allocated to Mexico are actually managed by this Fund for Protected Areas. But this is 95 protected areas. We have 232 protected areas in Mexico, so we have a long way to go. We are actually starting this year with an area devoted voluntarily for conservation. There's ADVCs in Mexico that are actually either indigenous groups or, just private owners that actually get a certification by CONAMP to actually, just designate their own areas as protected. We have a long ways to go. You can see here in the map of Mexico that in light green, you see those protected areas that already have funding, and in dark green, those that still require funding. And then you have the ADVCs that still will require quite a bit of them for funding. On the right, you will see that Mexico at this moment, in terms of the orange circles, out of the whole territory, if we have the 30 by 30 goal by 2030, only 12% have been decreed as federal protected areas. And out of those 12%, 8% have already this coalition of funding that allows for effective management. We're doing a little bit better with marine protected areas, where we have 24% decreed, only 10% funding. And as you know, marine protected areas are more expensive. So we have a challenging area here of not only ensuring effective management of what's already decreed, but actually increasing the surface, both marine and terrestrial, to be covered and conserved in some ways or others. So just as Denka indicated, we have worked with Biofin, that Alonso already showed, with determining what is the gap over the years. Right now, as you can see, 2024, the CONAMP has a budget of $100 million per year. And then on top of that, you see in purple what is sent by the endowment every year. So what the studies and analysis indicate is that this needs to go to $200 million. So in order to increase this, slowly but surely, we need to actually duplicate the funding for the protected areas in hopefully 5-6 years at the maximum. And CONAMP is working with Biofin very closely on this. They are right now working on the increased improvement of budgeting with public resources, and also the entrance fees are being looked at. We had an increase from 2024 to 25, but in pesos. And as you know, the peso, we had an issue with the exchange rate. So you will see in 2025 that in dollars will remain the same. CONAMP's budget remained the same. We are projecting for 2026 an increase of 20%. So hopefully by 2030 this is the optimist scenario, but hopefully between 5 and 10 years, we're closing that gap. In the meantime, you will see that those bars in orange, that is, where CONAMP and all of our partners and Fondo Mexicano are working to actually attract this transition fund so that we don't lose any of the deforestation. Mexico has 1.2% of the world surface, but it has 12% of the biodiversity. So any loss is a global damage. This is the optimist scenario. So we're thinking of raising this transition fund to close the gap, quickly in 2 phases. The first phase is this year to 2027. We already have $1 million deposited as part of the transition fund by the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. We were one of the first countries that actually accessed this new mechanism from the GF. The Green Climate Fund already approved the ACCION project that includes all the protected areas along the Yucatan Peninsula, along the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. So that will be dispersed in a few weeks. Then bilateral funding, we are talking to KfW and German cooperation. Hopefully we can have by the end of the year some positive feedback there. Another Green Climate Fund project is rivers and cities. We are actually submitting that concept note in a couple of days. Actually, we're going to be at the regional fund in the Dominican Republic in a couple of weeks discussing this concept note. Adaptation Fund, we hope to be accredited by the Adaptation Funds a couple of months from now. And then, as you know, GF will be coming next with the 9th replenishment. So that is our plan for phase 1. For phase 2 is less clear, but we hope that we can actually, just enlist the private sector at the international level. We're working with Enduring Earth. We're having a meeting tomorrow with people coming from everywhere. Zdenka is taking the plane, I hope, right now. And so we're in talks with them to attract the international private and philanthropic sector. And at the same time, we have started to talk with the Mexican private sector. It's very important for us that everybody joins this journey, not only the public sector and international sector, but also the private sector in Mexico. So this is an ecosystem. And we're getting together with World Wildlife Fund, the Walton Foundation, all sorts of different groups, because as a Mexican fund, we can help with the existing federal protected areas and make their management effective. But there's some donors and some organizations that are working in the decrease of new federal protected areas. Then there is the private protected areas that Audubon Society and others are, the Rainforest Trust are looking into, state protected areas where Wildlife Fund is working at the state level in Yucatan, and hopefully in not only in the Yucatan state, but in the whole peninsula and elsewhere. Then we have other means of effective conservation that are being, proposed to Congress by the environmental sector and municipal protected areas. So it'll take a lot, but we're really, really happy to actually start building this ecosystem, connecting with each other and fulfilling this dream, hopefully in less time than, or at least at a faster pace than the disappearance of our, natural treasures. Thank you so much, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rene. Super interesting funding and also all the experience that you have. Impressive that you want to achieve the 20% for 2026. And I look forward to learn more about what you were saying on financing marine protected areas, that I find it very challenging in my experience. So we are a little bit, so thank you so much. We are a little bit behind on our schedule. So before handing the floor to Andrew, I think we'll have time to one question to all presenters. We record the webinar, so we will be sharing the recording. We will send a follow-up email to all participants with the video recording, relevant documents. We will respond some questions that will be unattended. We also be sharing some other materials, for example, the online course by Biofin, a conservation finance course that is leading hack, that is going to be a transition from this webinar, and other materials of interest for this community of practice, particularly regarding conservation finance. I will open, I will make one question for all panelists from Nora Fabriani, that is asking how to decide which financial mechanism that best fits with the protected area situation. How can we decide which one is the best one, or how to start? If any of you can start with that, responding that question. Alonso.
Yes, I think I take this one as it relates also to the work of Biofin. In Biofin, in our workbook, and as you said, Magdalena, also in the MOOC is about to start, we have some guidance in terms of how to identify not only financial mechanisms for protected areas, but financial mechanisms for any situation. So basically, what we do is just to analyze the context, the political viability, the potential for institutionalization of the finance solution in the future, the sustainability, amount of resources, funding sources, etc. So we have sort of like a decision diagram on how to understand this feasibility for solutions. So I think you can check it in our workbook, but it basically gives you a list of questions related to each of the solutions. So who are the stakeholders? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? political feasibility, amount of resources, etc. And that takes you through a process of deciding whether that financial solution is suitable or maybe not. So, well, just to give you a resource you can find in our workbook.
Thank you, Alonso. David?
Yeah, thank you. Just building a little on Alonso, so start with what you currently have, right? The first thing you should do is do an assessment of all the
We lost you.
existing mechanisms that you have working for you. How can you doing around you, in the country? Look at neighboring countries or neighboring areas, and then. And the other thing is you could do an ecosystem service assessment. Like, what are the greatest assets? Who are the beneficiaries? And so you can really assess your stakeholders in a comprehensive way. And then bring everyone together and follow what the biofin approach or CFA has a tool as well over.
Thank you so much, David. Stephanie?
I think a lot of things have been said. It's better to have several sources of funding than just one. But I wanted to add one point. You need to also look at the kind of the money that you get, because unrestricted money is your most precious money when you manage a site. So it's not enough to only accumulate money that could be restricted to certain activities or to certain uses. You need to analyze where is the money coming from, how restricted that money comes to in terms of spending, in terms of targeting certain activities. And you want to also have a good mix between unrestricted and restricted money. So not only looking at the sources of the funding, but also the character of the funding is important. That's over.
Yeah, great point. And in fact, the legacy fund that you guys are leading had that specific characteristic that I found really interesting. I wish we could stay much longer. I mean, there are so many interesting questions, and the presentation opened also so many questions that I think that we want to learn more, and we want to see how we can implement to our specific context. We won't have more time, and we still have Andrew that is here with us. Andrew that will be sharing will be closing and sharing his reflection and closing remarks for the webinar. As I said, we will share documents. We can also respond some questions by email at the end, where we will send Q&As and our email documents and the video. So thank you so much for the great presentation. Thank you also for the Japan Biodiversity Fund to support this activity. And over to you, Andrew. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Magdalena. I believe you can hear me. And first of all, I just want to recognize all the speakers and all the participants here. And believe me when I say that you had the opportunity to hear from world experts what's going on finance, and also acknowledge that there's a great opportunity to learn from these experiences and tailor-made your own solutions for your own context. So pick and choose here and there what works for you. That's fundamental. So muy buenos días, and thank you all for joining us today for this important and timely webinar on sustainable finance mechanism in support of protected areas and conserved areas. We hope that the insights, the conversation, the experiences, the tools shared have sparkled new ideas and strengthened your understanding of the diverse finance approaches that can help advance the implementation of Target 3 of the Kunming-Montreal GBF. This session, as you all know, was co-organized by the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity and the IUCN World Commission on Protected Areas. And I want to thank specifically Candice and David Meyers as co-chairs of the Specialist Group on Finance of WCPA. As many of you know, and probably will recall, during the Target 3 Partnership Workshop in Cambridge around 2 years ago, around conservation finance emerged as one of the top priorities for collaboration. Now, today's webinar is a direct response to that shared commitment And it's really encouraging to see how far we've come in the developing and exchanging approaches to meet this challenge. As I mentioned before, over the last 90 minutes, 100 minutes more or less, we've heard a rich diversity of perspectives, from global guidance to national case studies, ranging from practical instruments to inspiring examples like the Sustainable Financing Initiative in South Africa, René González with the Mexican Fund for Conservation of Nature. Alonso shared an array of different portfolios and initiatives around the planet. These experiences remind us that while we are, there is, like as mentioned before, no one-size-fits-all solution. There is a growing toolbox of innovative, adaptable, and scalable mechanisms that can support area-based conservation efforts in different contexts. This webinar also underscores the importance of the Target 3 community of practice, a space for governments, NGOs, indigenous peoples and local communities, and other partners to exchange knowledge, tools, lessons that strengthen collaboration and shared learning. We encourage all of you to remain active in this community and follow us, the CBD Secretariat, WCPA, IUCN, as we work collectively to translate ambition into action. With the 2030 deadline fast approaching, the urgency to deliver effective, efficient, and inclusive conservation and results under Target 3 cannot be overstated. We must continue to build momentum and partnerships that turn financial mechanisms into meaningful outcomes for people and nature. Finally, we will be following up, as mentioned by Magdalena, with participants in the coming weeks to share the recording of this session, as well as the presentations and supporting resources presented for all of you. Thank you again for your engagement, your insights, and your dedication to conservation. Let's carry the dialogue forward and continue working together to ensure that the promise of Target 3 is realized on the ground where it matters most. Take care, and we look forward to connecting you with all of you again very soon. Hasta pronto. Magdalena, back to you.
Well, nothing else to say. Thank you. We had really, as Andrew said, great speakers, like leading speakers on this topic. And we all need to continue learning, but I really like the point that Andrew said, that there is a growing toolbox, and this is available today. It's going to be available today. Well, it was available today in the presentation, and it's going to be available within the follow-up email that I will send. So thank you to all the speakers. Amazing job, amazing, very inspiring experiences. And thank you to all the participants that came and joined us today. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.